Welcome to the Math Ed Podcast. My name is Sam Otten from the University of Missouri, and my guest today is a former colleague, a professor emerita here from the University of Missouri. It's Susan Empson. Susan, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Sam. I'm so happy to be here.
Susan and I worked together closely for about 7 years, 7, 8 years, I think, while you were here at Mizzou. But a lot of people might know Susan from her Austin connections, long time at UT Austin and back in Austin now. So very glad to have this chance to talk with you. Looking back at your career in math education. So we're going to kind of go through from grad school onward and try to follow some of the threads of your research trajectory. So it should be fun, I think.
It'll be a great journey.
Let's go back to the start. You might have been in education, you might have been teaching, and I think you were around the world teaching maybe in some ways. But what was it that led you to think about pursuing the academic life and going into higher education to sort of pursue some ideas of that led to eventually a research career in math education?
Yeah, that's right. I was teaching first in the Peace Corps. I was in Morocco and I taught high school math. That was right out of college. And then after that, I was also a teacher in New York City as I was earning a master's at Teachers College, Columbia University. They had a program for returned Peace Corps volunteers. So I was teaching high school there as well. During that time, I did a lot of what we used to call chalk and talk teaching. So very expository teaching that depended a lot on explanations. And I always knew that students' understanding was important. And I even had the belief that everybody could understand, but I didn't really understand what that meant or how to do it. And so questions about things like how to do better for students, maybe even how to do better for teachers naturally came up. And I asked one of the professors in my master's program, where are the best math ed programs right now? And the two answers were Wisconsin and Georgia. So I ended up going to Wisconsin, a state I had never been to before, and had a really, really amazing graduate school experience.
Yeah, and I wanted to definitely dig into that because UW-Madison looms large in the history of math education, a lot of research that came out of there, a lot of great thinkers and educators. So what was your experience in that grad school? Tell us a little bit of what grad school was like in that era.
Yeah, it was a happening place. When I got there, there was a National Center for Research in Mathematical Sciences Education that was housed there. It was one of the soft money centers that was being funded at the time. Tom Carpenter was there as editor of JRME. Liz Venema was there just finishing up her work on gender and math. Tom Romberg had just headed up the publication of the 1989 edition of the NCTM curriculum standards. There were a lot of research grants that were supported, and because of that, there were a number of speakers in and out, visitors in and out. So I really got a sense kind of how vibrant and active the field of math education was, and actually met a lot of people firsthand just by virtue of being a student on the CGI project. I'll mention also that CGI, Cognitively Guided Instruction, was in just beginning its second year of funding from the National Science Foundation. And so I worked as a research assistant on that project for my entire graduate career.
Wow.
Which was 5 years. I felt really lucky at the time to be there.
Yeah, and you got there where CGI was still kind of getting up and running and getting that momentum going, which then carried on for years and years after that, I would say.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But you were there in kind of the early phase, which must have been quite exciting. So is that the elementary connection then that helped, was the fact that CGI was getting started and provided funding for you? Because some of the listeners might be surprised to hear that Susan Empson had a high school teaching background because you're often thought of as fractions and elementary, So was that the connection to elementary because of CGI, or what was the link there?
It was CGI. Yeah, I almost forget that I started out as a high school teacher because I've spent the rest of my career working with elementary teachers and children. And I do remember as part of the CGI project, in the fall after things were up and running, visiting CGI teachers' classrooms. These were teachers from the first round of funding. So they were focusing on addition and subtraction, story problems. And I was blown away by what the first graders could do. I thought it was so fascinating. I became so curious about children's thinking. I was kind of hooked from the beginning. So that began my transition from a high school teacher to someone focused on elementary mathematics.
Great. And we'll definitely get into CGI a bit more, but I also just want to stop and make sure we get on the record your dissertation study. So, what was the focus of your dissertation study and who was advising you in that?
Oh, Tom Carpenter was my advisor, and I did it as part of the CGI project. What I did in my dissertation is extend the research on children's thinking from whole numbers, addition and subtraction, multiplication and division, to fractions using story problems. And to do that, I conducted what we were calling a teaching experiment at the time. Really, it's turned out to be a case study where I co-planned with the teacher instruction. She did all the teaching. And then I studied what children did. We focused mainly on story problems around equal sharing. So things like four children sharing seven burritos equally. And then I documented what happened during instruction, the kinds of things that kids learned, and interviewed kids both at the beginning and end of instruction to really kind of show how much understanding, fraction understanding they had developed.
Hmm.
The idea was to use those problems and to organize instruction around children's informal understandings of sharing and partitioning quantities.
Yeah. Okay, so this is definitely already giving some flavors of CGI, the cognitively guided instruction, and the thoughts behind that sort of larger project and larger way of thinking about math instruction.
Mhm.
So I want to dig into that CGI a little bit more, and I also want to let listeners know, if they haven't yet, they should definitely check out past episodes. I had the pleasure of interviewing Tom Carpenter back in episode 1607. And then Susan helped out the podcast by interviewing Liz Fenema. That was a great episode as well in episode 1704. So people can hear from folks who were there living at the time and hear those voices from the past to hear about CGI. But Susan, I want to ask about you to kind of go into this further. What does the CGI project mean to you? What were the ideas and how did they kind of like, resonate with you? And then CGI was a whole collaboration of people over years. So what did you see as your role or what are you sort of proud of as your contributions into the CGI story?
Yeah, CGI has really, I guess it has spread and been taken up in many ways by both practitioners and researchers. And I think, as far as my role, I think it's to participate in continuing to evolve CGI. One of the strengths, I think, of CGI is that it has frameworks and principles that can be adapted and taken up and used in different ways. There are some threads in common across researchers taking up CGI and extending CGI in that it focuses on sharing research-based frameworks of children's thinking with teachers and supporting teachers to engage with these frameworks in the context of their teaching. And there are many people who have built on this work, the work that was begun by Tom and Liz. They've taken it in many different directions. So just to mention a few names, and this won't be everybody. Of course, there's Megan Franke and her colleagues at UCLA. There's Elham Kazemi. There's Aaron Turner, Luz Maldonado, Nick Johnson, Naomi Jessup, Rob Schoen, and his group at Florida State, Vicki Jacobs, my current collaborator, just to name only a few.
Yeah, and it's been amazing to see one of these math ed projects and a set of ideas that has spread so far. And to me, it's kind of it's one way of translating research into practice, which is
Mhm.
a lot of research that went into looking at children's thinking and very systematically kind of trying to understand students' thinking. And sometimes, like you said, being surprised or impressed with what students can come up with when you give them the chance. And
Mhm.
so there's all that research that goes involved to it, but then putting it in formats that teachers can use it and help the teachers be able to digest that research into something actionable to me is like a big contribution of CGI. To be honest, I often do really think of it as like whole number operations, but then I know you push that, like you talked about with your dissertation, push that into fractions as well. So maybe continue to add on to that with yourself, like what you feel like you contributed or where your voice became important within that CGI conversation.
Yeah, I really appreciate the way you just phrased that in terms of making research about kids thinking accessible to teachers. That has really been kind of a through line in my research. And so the research that began with my dissertation study and was published in Cognition and Instruction as a case study of children learning in a first grade classroom, I really continued to build on it throughout my career, looking later at children in upper elementary grades, focused on fractions, then the kinds of supports and resources that teachers needed to center children's fraction thinking in their instruction. I guess I'll also say that my research on children's fraction thinking and work with teachers was synthesized in a book for teachers. And even though it's a book for teachers and not a research product, it was very much a synthesis of research that had been done, but organizing it in a way and framing it in a way where it was meaningful to teachers and usable by teachers.
Yeah, and that book, so my area of expertise is not fractions in elementary, but I appreciate it, of course, as a foundation for, math education in general. But I've had the pleasure, Susan, while you were working here, I don't even know if I told you this, but I witnessed some teachers who were kind of starstruck because you were around. And these were teachers who were like, Susan Empson, that's my favorite book. I think it's got to be the Extending Children's Mathematics Fractions and Decimals book, right?
It
Yeah.
is, yeah.
Yeah, so this has to be cool though to have a book that you wrote and have teachers say that's my favorite book. I think it just must be pretty cool, pretty cool.
I have heard many things from teachers, and it is so gratifying. They will come up to me at conferences and say things like, it changed my life.
Wow.
Really, I'm not kidding. And I appreciate anyone who reads a book like that and puts into practice in some way what's in it. I'm really just grateful to them.
Well, and
So,
I think one of the
yeah.
reasons maybe you struck a chord is because fractions are a difficult topic. I mean, I think, in elementary mathematics, that's a lot of teachers struggle and students struggle is fractions. And so I think having a book that really tries to provide assistance and insights on that is important.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it works because when teachers try the problems with children, they see children doing the things that are in the book.
Yeah, so it gives
So it
credibility
seems
for sure.
real. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's accessible. Yeah.
And so I want to just go to on the research side, though, fractions and equal sharing. What would be some of the main ideas that came out of your research? If you could kind of encapsulate it for us on the research side of things, what were some of the key insights that you found? Maybe it's around equal sharing itself to just probe a little bit deeper on that fraction work that you contributed so much to.
So the later work after my dissertation study, which focused on first grade children, so my later work, which focused on children in third, fourth, and fifth grades, and consisted of kind of a cross-sectional study of children's thinking, really documented what the development of children's strategies looks like. So beginning with early direct modeling strategies, these are strategies where kids are imagining the quantities in a problem. They might be drawing them out. Let's say it's the four children sharing 7 burritos. They might draw 7 burritos. Initially, they think about partitioning into pieces, but they aren't really coordinating that with a number of sharers. Eventually, they begin to coordinate the number of pieces they make with partitions with the number of sharers in some way, but still using drawings. So there's a way in which the drawing, the direct modeling strategies really kind of support children's reasoning and beginning understandings of what fractions are. And then eventually, kids are able to solve a problem like four children sharing 7 burritos in a way that's anticipatory and isn't distributed over the drawings they're making. So, for example, they might imagine the amount of burrito that four children will get sharing 1 burrito and think to themselves, multiply by 7 or 7/4 as one answer to that problem. So it outlined, my research outlined the development of thinking, passing through those kind of benchmark understandings.
So having seen those different ways that students think about the fractions and seeing it over time, and I noticed that you were very careful not to say that all students have to go through the same stages or at the
Mm-mm.
same pace or anything like
Yeah,
that. It's really
yeah.
about more being open to these different ways students will think about it. But in your own teaching or when you're doing methods courses, how do you build in some of those experiences for them to think about equal sharing and connect those to fractions and get that deeper understanding of fractions?
One of the things that I use both in teaching and also in professional development work with teachers is having teachers or pre-service teachers anticipate the kinds of strategies that children might use to solve a given, let's say, equal sharing problem,
Mm.
or it could be another problem too. And so that also gets them engaged in the math that is kind of behind those strategies, but in a way that feels often friendlier, like, oh, I'm going to be a teacher or I am a teacher. And now I have to think about what kids might do if I pose a problem like this. So I'll engage teachers or pre-service teachers in doing that. We will look at artifacts of children's thinking. So artifacts of children's thinking play a really big role in both of those learning contexts for teachers. We use written work. We probably have hundreds and hundreds of samples of written work.
You were kind of famous around here at the University of Missouri for having video clips for everything. You're like, I've got a video clip of that.
Yeah, and video clips. Yeah, yeah. And in fact, and I continue to work on creating video for teachers because it's so powerful. I guess in short, I would say that I concentrated on getting at the math through the lens of children's thinking and
Mm.
engaging people with children's thinking, and then to look at the math that comes out of that, because there's a lot of math in it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I always think of CGI as rooting the instruction in how the students are thinking and the student strategies that they have. But you're also kind of saying we can also learn the mathematics content by going through the students' thinking as well. So it's this the
Exactly.
students' thinking can open up all kinds of rich spaces.
Yes. Yes.
So I think you talked about doing work with teachers, and I think that might bring us into the 2000s because we've been kind of covering parts of the 80s and a lot of the 90s. But if we go into the 2000s, you do start to look at some teacher, what are teachers doing with this? How are teachers thinking about it? And so maybe how would you describe the next phase of your research as you kind of go into the 2000s?
So, one of the other tracks in my research is to really understand how what the teacher is doing during instruction supports children's thinking, both to be revealed and to develop. And so, I also had some papers that were focused on the interactional work of teaching. That includes a paper, an early one from Cognition and Instruction. That one actually built on my dissertation work, and it really took more of a situated learning lens, which was in contrast to the dominant lens of cognitive perspectives on children's thinking at the time.
Hmm.
I also, with another grant from the National Science Foundation, worked with Aaron Turner, Eugenio Dominguez, and Luz Maldonado to focus on classroom interactions, and in particular, how instruction supports bilingual students' problem-solving agency
Mm.
and the creation of what we referred to at the time as jointly coordinated shared understanding.
Mm.
So the idea that thinking first has a kind of distributed character, it is socially organized, and is, eventually taken up by children. So that was kind of building on that earlier work. And then I also did a study of teachers' knowledge of children's mathematics. It was a case study, but it was conceptualized really as knowledge in use, or knowledge as it was situated in practice. This really relates to what I was saying about using children's thinking about math as a platform for learning math.
Hmm.
We also thought about with teachers that if we could understand something about their knowledge of children's mathematics, we would learn something about their knowledge of math.
Mm.
And so this study involved teachers who were actually implementing the investigations in number, data, and space curriculum in Austin. The whole school district had adopted it at the time. And so we used scenarios of children's thinking to uncover what they knew. We really wanted to counter deficit notions of teachers' knowledge by focusing on what the teachers did know in the context and what they had learned in the context of teaching a standards-based, student-centered curriculum.
Yeah, and pose it to teachers in the way that they have more of a chance of success. Like the teacher, if you pose it around students, that really lets the teacher show, actually, I have a lot of insights in this area. Whereas if you give them a straight up math test or something, they might not ace it to the same extent.
Yep.
If you put it in the language and in the situations they're familiar with, it lets them show the depth of their knowledge in a different way.
Yes, that's exactly what we found.
Nice. And then continuing on that, you continued thinking about teachers and teaching away, and a lot of people more recently might be aware of your work around teacher noticing, a lot of which, or maybe all of which, has been done with Vicky Jacobs. So I actually do want to take a pause here. I know Vicky. Hi, Vicky. Um, But you've done a lot of work with Vicki Jacobs for years, and I know she's a UW-Madison graduate as well. So let me just pause and ask for you to share from your side of things. What's this collaboration like with Vicki Jacobs? Why have you done so much work together for so long, and how does this work out? It's one of these collaborations where you see somebody's name in the math of literature, and you kind of know this other name is probably not far behind. So what is that like from your side of the collaboration?
Yeah, you have such a delightful way of phrasing the question. Vicki and I were together. We were in graduate school at the same time. She was actually in the educational psychology program. I was in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, but we both worked on CGI, and that is how I met her. We probably took a couple of classes together too. There's a lot to say about this collaboration, and I think basically we feel, both of us would say that we feel it's been very productive in terms of the research we've been able to do and publish. I'm actually very proud of the work we've done on, it was another NSF funded grant with Vicki as co-PI. I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to do on that grant, and it does still continue even though the funding is over.
Mm.
So we have this shared history beginning in graduate school. So we're basically on the same page when it comes to a vision of instruction about how instruction should be driven by children's mathematical thinking. We also both bring what I would call a strengths-based perspective on both children's thinking and teachers' thinking. I alluded to those things before. And it really helps us to see the potential, both in what children can do and what teachers can do, where they might be headed. I think the thing that brought us together for this grant is that we have complementary areas of expertise. And so that creates a synergy. So Vicki had really been involved in research on professional development with teachers and teacher noticing. She has an article that's really, well known in the noticing world. So her focus is noticing of children's mathematical thinking. And then, of course, I had my research on children's mathematical thinking, so the children's side of things. And we basically value and trust each other's expertise. And we also have a collaborative style that allows us to push each other's thinking, ask each other hard questions. We aren't at all shy about that, and disagree without taking it personally. Our graduate students once told us that they really appreciated how we modeled productive disagreement because we do disagree.
Hmm.
And we also write well together because we have similar ideas, I think, about what a well-written article should be and what that looks like in practice. And we're really willing to take the time to improve it. If the other sees something or has a criticism, we take it seriously and work to improve. Basically, I'd say we both value quality over quantity, which is not to disparage quantity, but we are very conscientious about what we write. And plus, we like each other.
Doesn't hurt.
Yeah, yeah. And we have a lot of data. And so I think our analyses will never end.
May the analyses never end. That could be like a nice greeting amongst
Yeah,
scholars or
yeah,
something.
right.
I appreciate the point though about the disagreeing. Like for me, some of the most fun parts of a research team is when you actually have to really hash something out.
Yeah,
And it is not personal. It's actually like, no, no, we're doing the work.
yeah.
Like, and sometimes it's just like you take that side, I'll take this side, and by us hashing it out, we're actually going to get deeper into the nuances and the detail. I really enjoy that in some of my collaborative teams as well. And you're right. Sometimes doc students are watching that, and we've had it where a doc student after will be like, "Is everybody okay?" It's like, yeah, we're not only okay, we actually enjoy that. That's why we're researchers. We want to actually like debate on how to interpret this thing, or
Yeah.
and we also say it's better to have those discussions with your project team rather than to brush aside critiques. If you brush aside a critique, you might walk into a conference or you might walk in somewhere and then get blindsided by it. And, it's better if you've already talked about it and already tried to level your best critiques against each other rather than having somebody from outside do it.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's a lovely way to think about it. And plus you're getting at what you're hashing out what reviewers are going to inevitably bring up when you submit a paper for publication.
Yeah, so it's nice to do it with friends rather than anonymous reviewers.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. So, yeah, what are some of the things that have come out recently or that you're working on right now with Vicky? Maybe share a little bit more about some of the inner workings of that research.
Sure. Yeah. So just to say something about that grant, it was a pretty big grant. It was funded at about 2.9 million. And we had it, I think we ultimately extended it to 6 or 7 years. We had some no cost extensions.
Hmm.
And our focus was on how to use professional development to support teachers to become what we were calling more responsive to children's mathematical thinking. And then we also were interested in looking at how this responsiveness was related to children's achievement. So we basically conceptualized teachers' responsiveness in terms of three practices, all related to children's mathematical thinking. So the instructional practices we're noticing,
Hmm.
anticipating, and then questioning, all children's mathematical thinking.
Hmm.
And we had measures for those, and then we had also measures for children's achievement, both before and after instruction at the early part of the school year and near the end of the school year. And what we found is that we have several findings, but a couple of ones that really stand out is that teachers' expertise in noticing children's mathematical thinking and their expertise in being able to anticipate it were both associated significantly with teachers' ability, their expertise in questioning children's mathematical thinking, and then expertise in questioning was linked in a statistically significant way with children's achievement.
Oh, like their students, like how their students
Yes,
did
exactly.
mathematically. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah, that's in a PMENA paper,
Hmm.
2021. We also found that the number of years participated in our professional development was also statistically positively related to children's achievement.
Hmm.
So those are two important findings. It's, I think, a challenge in the field to have the resources and time to conduct a study with enough participants where you can ask and answer questions like this.
Yeah.
And yet there are many ways in which that study could be built on it or improved. So more recently, we're working on really in foregrounding the role for teachers of attending to and working with the details of children's thinking, because we're really thinking about the details as providing a window onto children's understandings and also a place to grow this understanding in the context of instructional conversations. So, for example, just as a very short example, for children who are working on, I'll use the same problem for children share 7 burritos. If they've drawn out the 7 burritos, partitioned them all into fourths, and distributed them one by one to the 4 sharers, the detail of how the pieces got distributed might be used by a teacher in a whole class discussion to compare with a strategy where a child might have drawn the 7 burritos, but only partitioned and distributed the fourths from the first burrito
Hmm.
and mentally distributing the rest. So that's a detail that's salient and meaningful to the kids in the class. And a focus on the detail really allows them to talk about the power of and kids to relate to it in the way that makes sense for them.
Hmm.
So that's what I mean by focusing, part of what I mean by attending to and working with the details. So we have a paper on profiles of teachers noticing of children's mathematical thinking as driven by this, starting with attention to details, in which we characterize and illustrate three distinct, qualitatively distinct levels of teacher noticing.
Yeah. That's in JMTE, right?
That's in JMTE. I think the
Yeah.
publication date might be 2024. It was online, I think, in 2022.
Hmm.
I might be wrong about a little off about that. We have a more recent paper in ZDM on the relationships between teacher noticing and how during whole class discussions, teachers take up the details in the whole class discussion. So we selected 3 different teachers from those 3 different categories or levels of noticing to then look at what happened in their whole class discussions.
Hmm.
We're working on a paper on teachers questioning during circulating and
Hmm.
the one-on-one conversations they have, thinking about the questioning as being anchored by the extent to which it focuses on exploring the details of children's existing strategies. And so
Hmm.
we've got 4 levels there that we've seen in our data.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
On my project, by the way, we're working on a teacher circulation paper also. But
No,
ours
really.
is in, yeah, it's like we're literally writing it right now. Ours is in algebra classes. But interestingly, like yours probably is going more into the substance and the detail of like when the teacher's circulating, what kinds of things they're asking and what they're seeing in the students.
Yes.
Ours is much more like how is the teacher moving around
Yeah.
and not actually what they're saying while they move around, but are they moving around?
Yeah.
We do look at whether they interact with students. Like, are they proactively kind
Yeah.
of going in to check in with students, or are they just kind of responding to hands in the air, which we call like more of a reactive circulation?
Yeah.
So we're just looking more structurally, where you're getting more into the substance of what they
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. It sounds like they'd be a great complement.
I know. I'd actually this. I
Yeah.
wasn't expecting this, but I'm going to be curious about your paper because we would probably cite it.
Yeah. Maybe I could send it to you and your graduate students can read it and give us some feedback.
Oh, hey, we definitely could.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
we have been reading some of the literature on teacher circulation, so that's fun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
But it's interesting to hear how your research has just, in a way, it's kind of continued.
Uh-huh.
I can see a thread from your very beginning all the way to now, but it also extends and touches on little new areas and new parts of teaching. Because teaching is so complex, there's always more little areas to dig into.
Yes, I agree. And I see that thread myself, obviously. And I think, maybe when I was just beginning, I would have been surprised to learn that I would spend most of my career focused on fractions. But that's what I've done. I really haven't ceased to be amazed by what kids do and what teachers can do. It's all very still intellectually stimulating to me, and I enjoy the work a lot.
Yeah, that's great. And fractions is a tough enough area. Even though teachers are doing great things and the students are doing cool things, it is still a tough area to master, like as an educational system. So it's also one that hasn't been solved in 20, 30 years.
It's amazing, given how much we know. It really is. But I'll also add that we're in the midst of writing a new book for teachers.
Oh,
And so this one will be organized around how children's fraction understanding develops in the context of instruction. So really highlighting teaching practices such as noticing and questioning, but also others around planning, hopefully in a way that supports teachers to implement these ideas and really support children themselves to develop what we think of as understanding. I mean, it's so easy to teach fractions in ways where kids don't understand.
hmm. Well, I want to ask you one more math ed related question, but it can be beyond your own research area. Just having your experience in the field for decades, you've been at Wisconsin, you've been at Texas, you've been at Mizzou, you've just been involved in math education for this long. Is there a key problem that you see in the field, or is there a key idea that our field needs to really tackle, like in the next few years?
In some ways, I think I might say, let's just keep doing what we're doing. I think that we're good at a lot of things in math ed, and there's also tremendous diversity in how people are thinking about problems. I still think that what happens in the instructional core, this is Richard Elmore's phrase to describe that triangle of tasks, teachers and students, the interactions that are happening, is a big support of how children learn. But what I think we've found to be difficult is how do we ensure that what happens in the instructional core with the way teachers are working with kids really takes, to what we just said. We know a lot about children's learning. We also know a lot about teachers' learning. And so really, I want to see us thinking about how to put those things together. I think in some ways it probably requires a more systemic perspective on how what's happening in the instructional core. And we can't forget that or leave it behind because it matters how teachers talk to kids and it matters the kinds of tasks that are getting posed. But other things also matter too. So things like district initiatives and policies, for example,
Mhm.
or learning supports for teachers. What supports teachers' ongoing learning? I mean, none of this is new. It's not really things that I've come up with. I think to me, the most important focus is really helping teachers to meet children where they are and with who they are.
Mm.
So all the parts of the system need to work together in some way. I haven't mentioned curriculum materials. They are also a form of support.
Mhm.
I will say that curriculum materials have not been a big feature of CGI. When Tom Carpenter and Liz Finema were beginning CGI, they had the idea, their innovative idea was to integrate research on children's thinking with research on teaching, typically in the field at that time, and this was the mid 1980s, the way that research on children's thinking got taken up for instruction was in the form of curriculum materials.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of different curriculums at that time. But Tom and Liz had the idea that let's just let teachers have that knowledge directly themselves and let's see what they do.
Yeah.
They didn't know what teachers would do. And they didn't provide any curriculum materials to help structure what teachers might do. They really wanted to know, and this is really the extent of their respect for teachers, they really wanted to know how teachers would make sense of that knowledge of children's thinking and then use it in their instruction. So it all kind of started in that way. So curriculum materials, back to the idea of a system supporting teaching. Curriculum materials are important, but I think there needs to be a lot more emphasis perhaps on supports for teacher learning. And that can happen in all kinds of places, including in undergraduate education programs, in professional development, and in ongoing site-based structures like coaching, for example.
Yeah, I think supporting the teachers is first and foremost, and I think focusing on teaching is I agree, put that above curriculum for sure.
Yeah.
I've done work with curriculum, but I would definitely put teaching and teachers first.
Yeah, and I recognize it's a little risky. I'm not bashing curriculum at all because teachers need curriculum materials.
Yeah, absolutely.
The curriculum doesn't teach itself.
Right.
The curriculum doesn't teach itself.
Yep. And the curriculum doesn't make the connections with the students as young people, like who they are, where they are, like you're saying. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate this conversation. Thanks, Susan. I know we could talk for much longer, and there's whole things that we haven't gotten to, but I think we covered some good ground, so I appreciate you taking the time to do that with us. I do want to ask you my official ending question, which is, if you look back and you did not do math education, if you did something completely different, is there an alternative career that you could have imagined for yourself instead of math ed?
That one's very easy. It's documentary filmmaking.
Oh.
And Corey Drake had the same imagined alternative career for herself. So Corey, I'm still willing to collaborate.
Oh, make it happen.
But that's what led me into making all the video for the original CGI project. It was that desire to, these weren't documentary filmmakers, but it was a desire to video and document and all that.
Yeah.
So,
well, and just to see the face and the tone of voice and to have it come from real people and all of that realism to it is powerful.
Yeah.
So you enjoyed your time here in Columbia with the True False Film Festival, which we just had last week.
I loved that festival. It was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. My brother came into town and we went last weekend. It was great as usual. It's a documentary film festival here in Columbia in March. So
I'm a little jealous. It's a really great festival.
Well, great. Susan, thanks so much for taking the time. It's great talking to you again.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I also just want to express my appreciation for the Math Ed podcast and the many varieties of people that you interview, all the work over these years. It's a lasting contribution to the field, and it's really special. So thank you.
Thanks for the support and thanks for being part of it.
Yeah.